Okay, seniors, we're going to introduce our court system here today, and we're not going to talk a whole lot about details. We're only just going to focus on this one slide for now and kind of introduce our court system or our judicial branch. So, Article 3 of the Constitution discusses our structure of our judicial branch, and really the Article 3 and talking about this branch of government, the Constitution doesn't really say a whole lot about it. Unlike Articles 1 and Articles 2, where we have Article 1 discussing our legislative branch and Congress, and it's very long and detailed. Article 2 talks about executive branch, a little bit about the president, still some nice details. But that third article talking about our judicial branch and our court system it's very short, and the Constitution doesn't really say a whole lot about it. Nonetheless, what makes it even more interesting, that in my opinion, is our judicial branch is possibly the most complex of the three branches. And yet its purpose is probably the most simple of the three branches. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about that, but our court system or our national judiciary, judicial branch, however you want to call it, that's what we're talking about here when we talk about our court system. Again, like we said, it's fairly complex. We have kind of a dual system of courts. We have state courts and we have federal courts, right? So in the state of North Dakota, we have, city, county courts, and federal level we have federal courts. So it's kind of an interesting system, and what depends on whether there's a state matter or a federal matter is the subject matter of the case. So for example, if you decide to fight a speeding ticket or a traffic violation, you are not going to go to federal court for that. That would be like a state court that you would go to, or a city county court. Okay. Generally speaking, more serious crimes that's when the federal court system starts to take over. Okay, so just kind of having a very basic understanding of that. Our court system then is comprised of trial courts, appeals courts, and special courts. There's a really nice image on page 521 of your textbook that kind of outlines those. But trial courts, again, that's kind of like your traditional, when you think what a court hearing looks like, that's kind of like your traditional, you have a judge, you have defense attorney, prosecuting attorney, you have a person that is in trouble, and maybe a person that's bringing forth charges, and then a jury. Okay, and that's a trial court. Appeals courts, what they do is they review the decisions of trial courts or of lower courts. We'll talk more about that here tomorrow. And then we have special courts. And at the federal level, special courts, and I guess at the state level you have them, there are special courts that exist that only hear cases about taxes. There's special courts that exist that only hear cases about family matters, i.e. divorce, child custody, etc. And they have very special subjects that they only focus on. Okay, but again, if you refer to page 521 of your text, there's a really nice diagram on there, and I think it'd be worth a look. Okay, the only court that is discussed in the Constitution is the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court is the highest court in the United States. So as in when the Supreme Court makes a decision, that's the way it is until they have another similar case and they rule differently. The president can't step in and say the Supreme Court got it wrong. Congress can't step in and say the Supreme Court got it wrong. The Supreme Court, when they make a decision, that's the way it is. Okay, and we'll talk more about them too. But they're the highest court in the United States. They are primarily an appeals court, meaning that the U.S. Supreme Court only reviews, or I should say mostly reviews, cases from lower courts. And again, they don't hear a whole heck of a lot of them, and we'll talk more about that here in the coming days. But again, when we start talking about jurisdiction determines which court gets to hear the case, right? We kind of already talked about that a little bit, but when we start talking about judicial jurisdiction, that refers to which court hears the case. So if somebody breaks a federal law for, let's say, drug trafficking, the Supreme Court is not taking that case right away. Okay, in that case, it would be like a federal district court that would hold original jurisdiction, basically meaning they get to hear the case first. Now, again, there are some select matters where the Supreme Court does hold original jurisdiction, and those are laid out in the Constitution. But something like breaking a federal drug trafficking law would not be one of those examples. I would also understand that all federal judges, including Supreme Court judges or justices, they're appointed by the president. They serve lifelong terms, basically meaning they serve until they resign, retire or they get impeached and removed by Congress. And what's interesting is the only government officials that have ever been removed via an impeachment have been federal judges. Okay, but again, they serve life terms, and the idea behind that is to insulate the judicial branch from politics. Because again, federal judges, they don't identify if they're Democrat, Republican. However, by having them serve life terms, if they make a ruling on a case that might not be unpopular, well, they can't be punished for it. Okay, because again, they are supposed to be independent of politics. They're supposed to be insulated from politics. But again, federal judges serve lifelong terms. They're appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. Now, does that mean they all serve in 80 years? No. But some judges will serve 30, 40 years. So that's kind of interesting. Again, the Supreme Court is the only court that was created by the Constitution. Talks about how the Supreme Court is the highest court in the land. That's pretty much all the more it says. It doesn't really even say anything else about qualifications to be a judge. What's interesting is, in Articles 1 and 2, there's all kinds of information on if you want to serve in the House, you have to be 25 years old. If you want to serve in the Senate, you have to be 30. If you want to be president, you have to be 35, and you have to be a citizen and live here and live there. Article 3 doesn't say anything about that. Okay, now does that mean that presidents are out there nominating Domino's pizza delivery boys to be judges? No. But again, the Constitution does not, it says so very little about our judicial branch, so it's kind of evolved over time. The only other thing that really says, that the Constitution really says about courts, is that the Congress has the power to create more courts. So what's happened here since the 1780s is that we have created a lot more courts, and states have had powers to create courts, and that's kind of what makes our very complex web now of courts in the United States. And the last thing I want to leave you with is this. We talked about Federalist Papers earlier in the semester when we talked about the ratification of the Constitution, how you had the Federalists of John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison, who wrote these essays to explain why the Constitution needed to be ratified. And one of the issues under the Articles of the Confederation is that we didn't have a national court system. Our court systems were all, they were all state courts, and there wasn't a whole lot of consistency. And so one of the big arguments that Madison makes in Federalist 78, the 78th essay, is that we needed to have a national judiciary, and the thing that made the judicial branch kind of unique is that he believed it was the weakest of the three branches of government because it lacks the power of sword and purse, whereas the Congress, legislative branch, Congress, and executive branch, president, they have war-making powers. The court system doesn't. Okay, Congress and the executive branch, they also have purse powers. They can do some things with money and funding and such. The court system can't. All the court system does is they review the actions, right? They review if laws are constitutional. They review if people had their rights violated maybe during a legal proceeding. They, from time to time, will, question government officials on other actions. Like you look at, the Nixon case where Nixon was withholding information pertaining to the Watergate scandal. That's what the court system does, is they evaluate and they interpret the Constitution, okay? And they cannot enforce their own decisions either, which furthermore, it kind of takes some of that power from them, but yet they're so influential in the sense in how they interpret the Constitution that those things can have long-lasting consequences. Okay, so kind of just a quick introduction here. Please let me know if you have questions. We will talk more.